Hello.
Hello.
I'm Jennifer Klein, and I'm here on July 1st, 2008, New York, in Scholastic, downtown in Soho, to interview Linda Kahn. So, for the purposes of our archive, we're going to start with some basic information about you. Tell me your name again and your birth date, if you wish, and where you're born, city and state.
Okay, I'm Linda Kahn. I was born September 15th, 1948, so this is a giant birthday for me, if anyone is counting, in Chicago, Illinois.
And is this the name you were born with?
It is.
Do you have a nickname?
Many.
Do you want to share one?
Not really. I mean, many. It depends on who it is and when and how they know me.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but as far as NIWIF goes, no.
Hmm. And are you a member of any guilds or unions?
I'm not.
So let's start with your educational background, your university and grad.
Okay, I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and in 1970, when I graduated, the choices for women, really, it appeared, were teacher, secretary, or social worker. So I went to one of what I perceived to be the meccas of the country. It was either going to be Boston or San Francisco, and I went to Boston and started teaching. But while I was in Boston, I ended up going to graduate school, and I got a master's in educational media and technology from BU. So I was going to school and teaching at the same time.
And please tell me about your time as a school teacher. What satisfied you about the job? What did you feel, if anything, was missing?
In many ways, it was my favorite job ever, because I was a junior high school English teacher. And it truly was a revolutionary and a very exciting time to be a teacher. When I arrived, they said you're going to teach classes called Mass Media and Persuasion, I never had heard of this, Poetry and Modern Music, Folklore, Basic English to 7th graders, the others were for 9th graders, a creative writing class, so it was really very exciting. And this school system in Watertown, Massachusetts had just hired lots of people who were about my age. So everybody was in their early 20s, all new teachers, because there had been lots of people who just retired. It was sort of a wave of people. So you had this exciting faculty, and you had a very exciting time in education in the country. And we had this remarkable woman, actually a woman named Ina Beth Miller, who was in many ways a mentor to me. And she had a media program going on at the school. I mean, it was a very big deal for us. 16 millimeter films. I mean, today it would be a very different world. Anyway, so in the course of this, I became very interested in media, and I started to take, in preparation for teaching, I started to take media classes. And there was a great class it was called Media Workshop for Teachers. And I went to this, and I started to go to other classes. But what was most astounding was, and this is what I really loved, is junior high is a great age. You either love or you hate this. I happen to love it because the kids were totally unpredictable, full of energy, short one day, tall one day, pimples one day, no pimples one day. But they said whatever they wanted to say. And they were very natural, and they responded to everything. So it was a great time to be working with kids in video production. Now the school system had very little money. We had a Portapak, which was a camera. It was like a big video camera. It came in a big suitcase. And you had to wind the videotape, you know, much like you would spool a movie projector, you had to wind the videotape. But I only got it 1 week a month. And on the other weeks, they wrote storyboards, because after I was an English teacher, so it was like writing a paragraph, writing a composition. And the cameras that we made were cardboard boxes, paper towel rollers, that was the lens. And the kids were great, though. And I learned so early about their media literacy because, for example, they were doing some parody of King Kong. A kid forgot his graphics. I thought this was a crisis. He didn't care. They drew New York City on the blackboard. They took erasers. They clapped the erasers. They had effects. They had smoke. They wiped out New York, and it didn't matter. Or they did a fight, and they dubbed the audio later. Things I never would have thought of, but they were natural to these kids. And it was, you know, for me, it was a great lesson, and it was very exciting. And then to actually see their pride in their productions. We had a radio show, loved our radio show. It came over on the loudspeaker.
Oh, wow.
You know, the call letters were the letters of the school. But again, the same kid whose mother didn't show up at home, or whose father beat him up that day, or whose sister, you know, I don't know, something would happen to the kid's sister, but who had such low self-esteem would sit up that much straighter in their seat when they would hear their voices on the PA in the morning, or when they would see their video, which we showed off, or when they'd see their photos displayed. And, you know, I quickly embraced and was embraced by the power of the media and putting it in kids' hands. So it was great, and it was fun. You know, it was just fun. And I did that for about 7.5 years.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it sounds like you really started to see that connection of positive reinforcement through the media just right in front of you.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, it's, you know, we had there was money later given by the government to create projects to help kids be more critical TV viewers. And after teaching, I went to a place called Primetime School TV, which was in Chicago. And it was a nonprofit educational organization where we would take evening television shows. At this time it was Roots or Masterpiece Theater or Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. These were like the best shows that were on network and PBS. And we would write teacher guides, and the teacher guides were mailed all over the country. So my job, though, wasn't to do the individual program guides. I was hired to write curriculum. So we wrote big projects, I don't know, say a dozen lessons or 24 lessons about different topics. The first was TV, police, and the law. So Kojak and Starsky and Hutch were wandering around on TV, breaking down doors, just doing whatever they wanted to do. And we said to the kids, here's what Miranda means. Watch and listen. Do you hear anybody reading a Miranda? You know, do you hear any words spoken that they're really supposed to be saying? And so the kids, obviously, the answer was usually no. But what was great is the kids were happy to learn about law-related education, happy to do the reading because they could relate to it. We had a project on economics. It was to learn about economics, the different kinds of economic systems that there could be. And we had them watching All in the Family because Gloria Bunker made cheval a la bordelaise, which is horse meat. And if everybody was making horse meat, what would happen to the price of horse meat? So we could teach supply and demand by things that they were proud of knowing and conversant in, and it was just their daily thing. And those were funded by Ford, and there was the Ford Foundation, those curriculum. But this was started actually in 1969 by Newton Minow and a phenomenal man named Irving Harris. And Irving Harris he passed away a few years ago, but he was a true philanthropist, businessman, and their notion was, you know, this is the era of TV as a vast wasteland, was, well, let's give kids power. And after what I had just seen in schools with real kids in action, it was great. And then I traveled all over the country with those projects, and Irving Harris underwrote everything. And the money went for workshops for teachers. And we gave the materials to teachers. So it was great. We went to New York City with this economics project, which came in a box, and we had a lunch for the teachers. And what they did is they looked at the box. It looked like a pizza box. They threw the lunch inside, carried the thing home, took the sandwiches. But it was great. It was really, again, it was quite exciting because the teachers felt empowered. And the teachers, instead of saying, you know, TV's my enemy, TV is something to be feared, I don't want the kids watching TV. I want them doing whatever, you know, homework or whatever. Now TV became homework, but it became homework in a very important way. Kids were learning about messages that were being conveyed on TV, and they also were really thinking about what they saw. Mm-hmm. And it connected to other subjects.
Does a program like this exist now?
I think there's variations. And at that time, too, the government funded different projects. There was, I believe, maybe preschool, a middle school, and a high school project. Again, with the whole notion of how do you get kids to be critical TV viewers. There's variations on it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. And then you moved, it seems, to Nickelodeon and switched into less teaching and more media-related career. At what point did you realize that this was going to be your focus as a career?
I have no idea. What happened was I was making business trips to New York, which was thrilling for me because the only time I'd ever been to New York, or I guess twice, was in high school. Once with my family and once with my sophomore class. So several of us were going to New York and actually looking for underwriting for these teacher guides, visiting the networks. So who in fact were our clients because we were developing materials for them. And I was thrilled. I remember being in MoMA, and I remember looking at the water lily paintings, and I remember thinking, I really want to live here. This is great. So that was the moment. But it sort of evolved, and it was an exciting time too, because this was the early 80s, and cable was new. So we used to work with ABC, CBS, NBC, and PBS as regular clients, but then all of a sudden there was this thing called Nickelodeon and HBO, and so we went to the cable networks, who ultimately did do some teacher guides too, and that was really how I met the people at Nickelodeon. And I thought, I would really love to work here. This is just great. So I was hired at Nickelodeon in a capacity of affiliate marketing. And what I would do, again, it was kind of similar, showing teachers, and in this case, the cable operators, giving the cable operators a tool. So instead of the boards of education, it was, here's a tool for the cable operators to let people in their community know, look at these great shows we have. And not only are they great shows, but here's something that you can do at home. So there was a guy named Don Herbert, and he had a show called Mr. Wizard's World, and that was one of the guides. And they were basically everyday scientific experiments that you could do.
Wow.
But it grew from there.
When you say affiliate marketing, it sounds like your time with the nonprofit in Chicago gave you some training in this field.
It
But
did.
Did you have any other pointed professional training for affiliate marketing?
No, and I think that, I'm going to tell you the story of here's my career, and it sounds very logical and thoughtful and orderly, but in fact, at that time, it was more circumstantial opportunities. I was going to say presented themselves, but in fact, I sought them out, but it was, as much as we felt limited as women, we also saw great opportunities in new industries, and cable TV was one of these new industries. And it's no coincidence that there are so many women executives. I mean, for me, it was like a door opening, and I had never had any training, in a corporate world. I remember we all went to a course called Finances for the Non-Financial Executive, because in fact, it was a business, it was a real business, and we had learned how do you really run a real business. So it's kind of an interesting evolution. So I went from the marketing department into programming because my boss, Jerry Laybourne, was just promoted to running programming, and she needed somebody to do acquisitions, which is basically looking at programs, figuring out what we don't produce, what might we license that's already been produced. And so we talked and she said, I think I'd love you to do this. So I actually was learning about program acquisitions, but I think when I go back to what did I learn as a teacher, it's respecting the audience. In the case of teaching, it's the kids. In this case, it's the kids also who are watching. And it's the trust of you're really got to find the very best things you can for kids, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's on TV. And so there were certainly similarities in that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And around what year was this?
83. I went to Nickelodeon in 83, and I was there, terrified in New York. And I was there in thanking people for being my friend. It was kind of pathetic. But I was there and I did the marketing job for a couple years and then was in program acquisitions for about 6 or 7 years, and then went to the opposite side, which was selling our programs around the world. What was exciting about the program acquisitions in this era is we started Nick at Night. So we were in a room of, conference room with 20 people around a table saying, okay, Nickelodeon is on all day. At night it was then the Arts and Entertainment Network. A&E is on at night, and all of a sudden A&E was going to get a whole channel, and we had this time, and we thought, what could we do that made sense, that was a natural extension of our brand? And also, to backtrack, we had to figure out what is our brand, because we didn't want to be the green vegetables channel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we didn't. There were Nickelodeon had these colorful, puffy letters, like cloud-like letters. And we said, you know what, we really need a look, we need a feel, we need to become a destination for kids, we need clear messages, we need promises for kids, we need to be the network that really is for them, that they're going to go to the programs, but also go to the network to be their home, not a watered-down version of an adult network with every genre that an adult network would have, but made for kids, not the junior whatever the show was, you know. And we learned a lot. We did tons and tons of focus groups, really, again, and this was the same thing that was true in teaching, really listening to kids. And at prime time as well, listening to what do those teachers want and need when we're developing the materials, and really listening, in the case of Nickelodeon, to what were they saying. I mean, I remember being in one focus group, and this girl said, I would never have that on my Nickelodeon. But it was, we knew we accomplished a lot because it was hers. And that was huge. You know, that was just huge. When we were buying programs for Nickelodeon, and this goes back to about, actually, 85 maybe, Nickelodeon was one of the first networks to look outside of the US for programs. Today this is quite commonplace. And today the whole business has shifted to be truly global. But in those days, people were myopic. They sort of had blinders on, and it's got to be made here, it's got to be invented here. And we went all over the world and scoured the globe for the very best kids programming. Sometimes we repackaged it, sometimes it could run as strips, and that was, you know, that was quite exciting. But for me, it was also my introduction to the world of programmers, buyers, sellers, producers all over the world, and the tastes and the nuance and the subtleties and what's important where and how, and that was great. And so after being a buyer, and also, you know, being part of the team who did all the work on Nick at Night, I went on to the opposite side, which was selling, and we had just at Nickelodeon evolved to the point where we could produce our own shows. So we produced game shows, and I sold Double Dare all over the world, the format for Double Dare. And then we did these 3 amazing animated shows, Rugrats, Doug, and Ren and Stimpy. And we sold them all over the world, and it was really thrilling. And what was great about selling was the people I was selling to, really, many of them were my friends. Because I would walk around markets with them, we would share, what are you looking for, what's your network like, here's what our network is like. I remember going to TV markets, program markets, and having to educate people about what is cable TV. Why do you need a kids channel? How does it work? So I knew these people for a long time in different capacities, so it was great because I understood what they really wanted, and I wasn't going to waste their time with things that they really didn't want.
Absolutely, and it seems like business is so much about relationships.
It's completely about relationships.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you spoke about the team who began or launched Nick at Night. Can you tell me a little bit more about who those people are now, who sat in the room with you?
Well, Jerry Laybourne, certainly.
And what they do.
Yeah, well, Jerry obviously ran Nickelodeon for many years and started Oxygen and grew it to, you know, a phenomenal level, and you know, Oxygen has just been sold. And Debbie Beasy was in that room. Debbie was the programmer looking at original concepts and also on-air promotions. Betty Cohen may have been. Debbie went on to work at Oxygen, Comedy Central for a while, and then not Comedy Central, Ha, which was MTV's comedy network, and then Oxygen. Betty Cohen might have been, Scott Webb was certainly there. Scott was doing on-air promos. And his view was so important because we bought Lassie. which is also how I met my husband,
Oh, wow.
because he had the other 300 episodes. We had 300, he had 300, but he wanted too much money for them, so
Wow.
we got them from someone else. But Scott looked at Lassie and he said, you know what, and the criteria for all the Nick at Night shows was they've got to be really good stories. They have to be well written, lots of episodes, and really good stories. And Lassie had really good stories. But when we were promoting them, we could never make fun of them. We had to really respect the characters and the stories. And you could laugh and you could have a great time, but you wanted to always keep the integrity of the show. So Donna Reed, which was a show that I loved when I was a kid, he did a great promo campaign with Donna Reed having Grace Under Pressure, or GUP. And it was, what's your GUP quotient? So they were very funny things that really talked to the audience who knew those shows. But, so Scott was doing the on-air promos. Marketing eventually was Rich Cronin. I'm not sure if he was in that room, and he's at Games Network now. Scott was at Nickelodeon and MTV Networks for years. I'm not sure where he is now. So, I mean, everyone that was involved, many people stayed together. Betty went on to Cartoon Network and then Lifetime. Ann Sweeney, who worked with me on acquisitions, is running, ABC. So it was just an amazing team of people. And I think too, I'm glad you mentioned your question, team, because we really were a team. And we spent a lot of time and we've put a lot of energy into being a better team all the time. And that was very important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And at this point, what challenged you the most, personally or professionally?
Well, one of the things was, I think we were women, and I come back to because we're doing this for NIWIF, but also we were women in business, and we weren't MBAs, we weren't sort of trained in business. We used a great deal of our own intelligence and intuition. And there was a remarkable woman who was a NIWIF member for years, and she was a mentor to Jerry, she was a mentor to me, and many other women in the industry, and her name was Bernice Coe. Bernice was this remarkable woman who distributed children's programs. And Bernice, long before, she started her own business when she was 15, long before anybody was doing this, she was going to international television markets and picking up great animation. A lot of it was short films, but great things. More than her catalog, and she had lovely women working for her. But more than her catalog, and more than that was, she taught us. She went to our speeches. She held our hands. She talked to us. She tried to fix everybody up, mostly unsuccessfully. When I got engaged, I was more nervous about bringing my fiance to meet her and her husband than I was my own parents.
Wow, special.
But she was a very unique person, and many of the women in the business today learned so much from her, and it's reflected and it's carried on in how they do business too. One thing that Jerry told me, because Jerry also was a great mentor, and one thing that Jerry said, Jerry's husband at the time was an independent producer, and she said, Linda, think about these people that come into the room. They could all be him. Those projects mean so much to these people, and it was, again, just treating people with respect and listening to what they had to say. Obviously, it wasn't for us, it was for us. And I think the other thing we all learned was being very clear in our messages.
In terms of your programming?
In terms of our programming and in terms of our business interactions, but in terms of all of it, it was just being very precise. In terms of the programming and the marketing, absolutely. But in terms of the business interactions, it's just being very specific about what we were looking for, and figuring out what we looked for. There was a lady named Min Levy who worked for Bernice, and the first time I was buying specials, that was one of my first jobs, and she sent me these specials, and they were pretty horrible. So I didn't want them. We had a slot on Saturday and Sunday for a couple hours for specials, and she asked me why I didn't want them, and I was totally flummoxed, because I knew I didn't want them, and I knew why. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Well, of course, there were no feelings involved, but I had no idea that there were no feelings involved. And I finally said, well, and I was hemming and hawing, and she said, well, you could just tell me. Tell me why you really didn't like them. And she taught me so much, because the next time she didn't give me, whatever she was showing me, she gave me something else. It might have been wrong too, but at least I learned, and I think a lot of people taught each other.
Excellent. And you touched on this, but I'd like to go a little farther. How did the world of work exist for women when you started out, and how did you work to change it, to try to change it?
Well, I think that, I think it was quite limited when I started out. And when I started out, I would really say it wasn't teaching and it wasn't the nonprofit, because I think those were very traditional places where women always excelled and where women had genuine opportunities. Although I will say, as a teacher, there weren't women administrators by and large, which also was a frustration that I had. And that's changed radically, that's changed radically. I think that the ways that I look at changing it today are, I always talk to people. If someone calls, almost no matter who they are, I always have 15 minutes, whether it's on the phone or in person, because I was lucky. Somebody listened to me, somebody gave me a chance. I had an internship somewhere at this place in Boston, and these people were really very, very nice. I thought I was a day camp counselor. They straightened me out. But, I think it's the notion of taking time, and taking time to share what you know, and nobody's going to take it away from you. Not holding on and not being so closed and not being so protective, but really giving people chances, and more than one chance. Because I've had people work for me, men and women, who by and large have been excellent and superior, and really want the jobs they have, and really go above and beyond. And I think part of it is because they are excellent and superior, but part of it is also because they feel empowered and they're part of a team. And I think it's a question of authority and responsibility, and people need responsibilities, and they need authority though. They can't just have a bunch of things to do. They also have to be allowed to, live by their decisions and make decisions. So I've always felt it was important to give people a chance to own their jobs, and a chance to really, define and own their jobs, and be part of a team, and see a light at the end of the tunnel, because you can do so much really hard work that's not that interesting, but there may be really a reason that it is more interesting than you think it is, and to show that to people, but also to give them something that they're dying to do.
The bigger picture.
The bigger picture. The bigger picture. But the parts are so critical, and to see why and where the parts are fit in to what I need. And the other thing is, I think there's way too much. I've always felt like hierarchy. So I have an incredibly smart assistant. She's not an assistant. She's a coordinator of our team, and it's a small team. And we just had the New York licensing show. We had her in every single meeting, because she's going to be doing a lot of work. But the other thing is, she's really smart. And she gets it, and she should be at that table too. So.
You sound like a stellar employer.
Well,
yes.
But I've got stellar people working for me, and I think that, and peers, that's the other piece that's crucial too.
Yeah, yeah. And then in terms of when you first started out, how, if in any way, did it differ for racial and ethnic minorities versus now?
Well, at MTV, and this is probably, maybe, gosh, it must be 20 years ago, there was a big push that said, look around, and this workplace has got to change in terms of its composition. And so there was an all-out effort to really make it a much more diverse workplace. And I think that's good. And I think that was probably typical of many more enlightened businesses, in our industry. And so I think that is a change from when I started to the present.
And the enlightened businesses, as you put it, the enlightenment comes from just within the environment, not necessarily outside pressure or anything like that.
In these cases, I believe it
okay.
did.
Okay. So just from looking around.
The other thing is, I think that the world's changed, and just like I grew up thinking the best thing I could be would be a teacher. And if I was a married teacher, man, that would really be even better. That was like these are big goals. And those aren't the goals that somebody has today coming out of college. Somebody like me they're completely different goals. And the doors that are open, there's so many doors, first of all. It's just totally different. I go to these TV markets. I've been doing this since the early 80s, every year in France. And basically, they're massive. Maybe there's 10, 12,000 people who go. And now I'm at this point where I sit with some of my friends and we kind of grab each other for a coffee and say, just look at how different it is. And look at the people that are here buying and selling and producing these shows. The world is radically different. There's just infinite opportunity. I was on a great panel years ago in Australia, and this panel was about women in film, and we're supposed to say, how did you get to be a woman in film? The panel had a very distinguished person from the UK in children's programming, a programmer from one of the from USA Network, a researcher from Canada, a producer from Canada, and me. And we were all on other panels, part of this conference, but we talked for weeks about what are we going to talk about. And we were still talking to the minute we sat down at this panel. Nobody knew what to say. Because we didn't know if we should talk about our jobs or how we got there or what it was. And the woman who introduced the panel started to talk about statistics, and she told about women in the workforce and how it's changed over the years. Kind of the questions you're asking but she gave all the statistical background. Here's how many more women there are, here's how many work and have families, here's the ethnic and racial mix. Very serious, and I'm thinking, I am really up the creek because I have no idea what I'm going to say, and she sounds really great. And all I could say, the first thing that came to mind was, I'm tall. I said it didn't matter if I was a man or a woman, I was tall, and that was about the worst thing I could be because everybody I grew up with was short. And for some reason, this was the right thing to say. The next woman said, unlike Linda, I'm short. And because I was short, da-da-da-da-da. And the next one says, so it was then, by the end of it, people were talking about, yes, what were their challenges, but it was sort of like, what was their life like that even brought them to come into that room that day? And many of these women who I knew really well, 3 on the panel that I knew really well, I didn't know as well until after that panel, because we started to talk about feminism and what it meant and how it started and what our early experiences were. And it was enlightening. And then the women who were in the room ranged, I would say, in age from early 20s to late 60s. And each one, too, brought such a different interpretation of what all this meant. So it was really challenging, and it was exciting. And it was surprising to hear what people were saying. So,
thank you. Oh, you talk about France and Australia. What other languages do you speak other than English?
Oh, very mediocre, a few things. Very French and Spanish, but not great. I mean, that is to me my greatest disappointment in myself. I really do think that it's such a great sign of respect to be able to converse with somebody in their own language. And I tried. I made a great speech once in French, which somebody translated and I read more or less, but I helped. But I made this great speech, I thought, and I get up in front of this big audience, and I could hardly get out of New York because we had a snowstorm and my cab driver was Haitian, so I practiced all the way to the airport, and he was helping me and he's giving me tips. And I get to Paris, and it's in a museum, and then the museum had to be under construction, and then Mitterrand died in the middle of it, and people left. I mean, this thing was so hilarious, but I did make a great speech once in French.
Congratulations. Yeah. So you spoke a bit about Bernice and Ina. Can you tell me about your mentors early in your career and who are your mentors now?
That's a very good question. I think really my first mentor was this amazing woman named Ina Beth Miller, because she was brilliant, she was very kind-hearted, she was very smart, she was a pioneer, and she just bucked the system. And what was thrilling about her, she passed away a few years ago, and what was thrilling about her was that she was always 5 steps ahead of everybody. And the idea that kids could use media in a meaningful way, and that they could watch films, and that they could make films, and that this could make them powerful and better was great. Mm. And so this was in a very middle-class school system, and she was a great leader. And then she went on to Harvard Graduate School of Education and other places, you know, and always was, you know, you would talk about her to anybody who knew her, and they would, you know, you sit straighter. And Jerry Laybourne was an amazing mentor to me, because we were all growing the business together. And the idea that it wasn't just her, it was she wanted a team, and she wanted a team around her. And she listened, and we talked a lot about listening. And she's just also, a great visionary. And it's not just about having a vision, but it's how do you make it really happen? How do you translate it? And this woman, Bernice Coe, was extraordinary, because Bernice, she was a woman in business. And she too, she bucked the system. And all of these people had a very high regard for people, for women, for quality, for, you know, really operating with integrity. And, you know, today I don't have a mentor, but what I do have that I think is really valuable, and what I learned, is we need to have mentors who are younger than us. Those ladies, I mean, Jerry and I are about the same age, but the other women were a little insignificantly older than I was. But it isn't so much anymore about a mentor, you know, here's this woman that I can really look up to and who's going to show me the way. I hope I'm showing people the way, you know, to whatever extent I can. But I need to learn the way, because there's a lot of new roads. Mm. And we had an amazing time putting together a videotape honoring Terry Lawler for her 10th year as executive director. And in that session, there were a lot of people who I know through NIWIFT who came, and we were talking, and we sat there and we said, you know what, we need cross-generational mentors. I need to learn what you do, and you need to learn what I do. And we bring such different skill sets, and they're all really important. Mm-hmm. So.
Great. So now, you spent 12 years as senior executive positions at Nickelodeon mm-hmm. and MTV Networks. But then you, at some point, at what year did you change companies, and what prompted that change?
In the early 90s, I felt like I had done so many great things with Nickelodeon and MTV, and really saw both significant sides of the business in terms of buying and selling programs and programming and marketing and growing a business, and that was really thrilling. And I thought, you know what, I want to do something different, but what I want to do, I wanted to connect back to my roots in education. So like everybody in this country, and actually several other countries, I grew up with Scholastic. I had Scholastic magazines as a kid. I was a teacher, and I had a book club, you know, of Scholastic books. And my current boss, Deborah Forte, was someone I knew. And I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to call her, because I had always admired the work of Scholastic, both as the publishing company, but also as the production company. And I thought, you know what, maybe there's, I'm exploring, maybe there's something there. And she said, you won't believe it, but there actually really is a job. And what she wanted me to do was to grow, to grow the business in a global way. And it was a time of change for our particular business unit because we had just produced Magic School Bus. We were going to produce Goosebumps, and these are TV series based on gigantic publishing franchises. And the notion was, well, let's not just make a show and get it on TV. Not that that's an easy task, but let's also build it so it's a brand. And so we really understand what it is in terms of, or so kids not understand, so kids can experience it in every way, wherever they are. So whether it's consumer products or videos or interactive or the TV show, as well as, of course, books and magazines. And so what my job is to take those brands and build them all over the world. I focus everywhere but the United States. So when we say we're going to option a book, and it might be a Scholastic book or a book from another publisher, or it could be an original idea that we come up with or someone brings us or someone in another country has, then what my job is to figure out, okay, how can we fund this and how can we fully develop the franchise in many different places. And what's exciting today in the TV business is also the biggest challenge. The financial models have changed radically. So when I was a buyer at Nickelodeon, the world was really different than what a buyer experiences today. And the production of a program is financed in a completely different way. And license fees are radically different. So I started out begging people for their shows on Nickelodeon. Now, of course, people would kill to have their shows on Nickelodeon. But I'm in a spot as part of the biggest publishing company for kids in the world and an independent producer in a very limited universe, even though it's a universe that's exploded with channels, of getting your show on the air because there's so many programs and so many producers. So it's a great challenge to get your shows on the air everywhere. And what people are looking for is the same things that we've been talking about this afternoon. Really great quality, shows that are going to have great stories, great writing, appeal to kids, talk to kids, respect kids, and leave kids enriched in some way. And it helps if they're funny, and it helps if they're beautiful to look at, and it helps if they're, whatever the thing is that you need. It very, age specific, based on a curriculum, whatever it is, but it's got to be a really, really, really outstanding show. And then once you've got the creative in place, well, you've got to get it paid for because pockets are not as deep. The networks aren't paying the same kind of license fees they used to. So it's looking at a lot of different funding sources, and it's also possibly looking at partners. And partners come all over the world. And that's very exciting because everybody's bringing not just their financial expertise or the revenue that they project that they can make, but they're also bringing their creative ideas and their production skills. And how do you meld that all together? And it's a challenge. So it's interesting. And what is also exciting, this is why I'm looking for a mentor, but what's also exciting is we live in a world of exploding channels and exploding platforms. So you've got video on demand, you've got IPTV, you have all sorts of opportunities to stream mobile. And some countries, networks are on mobile phones, same time, exactly the same time. How do you figure out what rights you want to sell, what rights you want to give away? Well, you don't want to really give them away, but what do you want to include in a grant of rights? And maybe it is giving something one year because the next year it's really going to be big, or do you want to hold on to it? Because these people are never going to do what they're doing. So it's great. When I first started to sell programs, someone told me to sell, you had to be a master buyer. You had to be a master programmer because you really had to understand. And that's what, to be in the TV business today, You sort of have to be a master in each country, understanding how are things distributed, how are they made, how are they distributed, and who's really watching, and how are kids consuming and using television. So it's really exciting and interesting.
One aspect that I'm a bit unclear about, you spoke, you sell the programming internationally. How much influence or conversation do you have around the creative?
For me?
Yes, for you.
It's limited, but it's limited. It's limited. I'm not coming up with the ideas for shows or developing the programs or writing scripts. I'm not doing any of that.
Yes.
My responsibility is more on the sales and marketing. But where I do have impact, we have a new show called Word Girl. And Word Girl is a fantastic show where in some ways it's a spoof of superhero shows. It's an animated sitcom. And what's so great is here's Word Girl, who's a 10-year-old superhero, and she can fly, and she's strong, and she's really smart. But eloquence is her greatest, just her greatest strength. And she defeats these bad guys, like a butcher who butchers the language, or a bank-robbing granny, or a lady redundant woman, who's my new favorite, who works in a copier store and is disgruntled, so she's evil and makes copies of herself. But Word Girl outsmarts them all. So in every episode, in every 11-minute story, there's a couple words that kids will learn from the context of the show. So as this show has been developed, I'll read all the scripts. In fact, I have 2 to read tonight. But I'll read all the scripts, which is fun for me, but I'm not looking at them necessarily for, is this holding together? I'm not critiquing them as scripts. What I'm really looking at, but what I'm really looking at is, are there visual puns? Are there any puns here that somebody, when I translate it into 5 languages, isn't going to get? Because if there's a real play on words, and you're using the word cucumber, and you're making a joke, not cucumber, cumbersome, and you're making a joke with cucumber and cumbersome, or you have some sort of a pun, or you've got lots of words on the screen, that's never going to work somewhere else. So I'm looking at them with an international eye, or if there's something, we can't help it. We are who we are, and so when you write about something, you might throw something in that's a cultural reference that you know and I know, but is totally irrelevant to somebody else. And it's not so bad that it's there, it's just, can it be translated, and does it need to be there at all? Is there not a more universal way to deal with it? So that's sort of the creative input that I'm giving, is how do we make these more international, how do we globalize them? Not everything should be or could be, but most things can be.
What were your hours as a buyer at Nickelodeon, and what are your hours now?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think we all work late. I think it varies. It varies. That's so funny. I think, and maybe it's a function of New York. I mean, now this is the thing. I always make the time zones work. So with Blackberries and computers, it's laptops, it's a whole nother thing. So if I get up and it's the middle of the night and for some reason I can't sleep and I email somebody, they used to say, "What are you doing awake?" And now nobody thinks about it because they're emailing me at odd hours too. So I think you make the time zones work, but I think we all, it varies all the time.
Yeah.
There are no 9-to-5 jobs in this business. That's the message.
And in that sense of lifestyle, how have you balanced family and your work? What trade-offs or sacrifices have you made?
I don't think I've had to make any sacrifices, but I don't have any kids. So I don't have big demands like I must be somewhere at a particular time. And in fact, my husband was in the syndication business for years, so he really understands the business and the pressures and what it's like, and we really sort of understand the same business world. So fortunately, I haven't had to make any trade-offs. I think I really haven't, which is good, which is really good. And the other thing that's happened, and this is something that you said earlier, what I do is based so much on relationships. The quality, the of a program, the appropriateness, the smartness, the critical value of it is a given. But if it is a choice, it's going to be the relationship that's going to make something happen, and also understanding the person who's sitting across from you, so you're really trying to win for both of you, not just for you, and you're not short-sighted. And because of that, I've been really fortunate and have a lot of amazing friends in the business. So when you ask the question of the balance of home, I mean, a really great example is 2 friends of mine are going to be spending the next week with me. One was the buyer of fiction for a major network in France. The other was running a major network's kids department. And these are really among my best friends. Now, I see them a few times a year, but it is as if I've always known them my whole life. And I think it speaks to this business. And what I say is true for people in every, it's not just the children's TV business. I think it's across the board. And I think I think we form intense relationships and really need to trust each other as we do our jobs. And so it's a great thing. So I think, you know, there's certain sacrifices people must make because there's only so much time in the day. But it's those relationships that make the sacrifices, if there are some, a pleasure. I mean, it's not such a bad thing to go on a business trip and be with people you just love. And sometimes you're doing business with them and sometimes you're not, but how great.
How many times a year do you travel?
It varies.
It does.
Yeah, it varies.
So looking back, what was your greatest achievement?
Oh God, I think surviving that first year of teaching. I would say, in many ways, it really, things that did have to do with teaching, because it was such a responsibility. And then I think being part of the team that really shaped Nickelodeon. We didn't start it, but we shaped it, because it was shaped it and started Nick at Night. And that was thrilling and invigorating. And then I think to come to Scholastic has been fantastic too, because of, again, the quality of what we're doing and the amazing colleagues, you know, and actually throughout amazing colleagues. So I can't point to any one thing, and that's, I have to think about that. But it's you know, it's great. The other thing is NIWIFT, because NIWIFT has been an amazing experience too. So many people will say exactly the same things about this organization. There's a community, and there's a friendship, and there's a respect, and there's a real leadership, and there's a give and take, and a chance to learn that you would not have anywhere else in any other professional organization. And that's extraordinary. And again, the friendships that people make, and the most unlikely people that you meet. I would never know many of the people. I would never in my daily work encounter the people I know in NIWIFT.
You moved here in around 1983. Excuse me one moment. You moved here in around 1983, and you've been here since. At what point did you become a member of
Early, because Bernice took me to a Christmas lunch, I guess.
Wow.
But early, it was, I don't know. It must have been, it was the 80s.
80s?
Yeah.
And during what years were you president?
That's a good question, too.
Okay.
I think early 90s. No. I was president maybe about 6-7 years ago.
And maybe 97 to 2000?
Maybe 97 to 2000, maybe.
And over your term, what changes did you see in the organization and also in the industry from start to finish?
Well, in the organization, it's expanded. When I was president, we decided it was time actually to write a 5-year plan. We had a 5-year plan, and it was time to write a new one. And one of the things that we set out to do was to really diversify the membership, grow the membership, find things that would be satisfying for women at all levels of the industry. And I think that the organization has succeeded, pardon me, on all of those levels. And what is most important about NIWIFT is it's never become impersonal. And when I first started going, the holiday lunch was much smaller. And now the holiday lunch is massive. But it's that same connectedness, and it's that same feeling of we're all here together and how great to see each other that has always endured. And that's really, really important, to be personal and professional. And in this case, it really is.
If you could sum up NIWIFT in one word, what would it be?
I would just say community.
And what does one need to do to be on the advisory board? And once you're there, what are your roles?
To be on the advisory board, you need to have been a board member. And the past presidents become the chair of the advisory board. So that's, it's a really good thing, because the advisory board, this project, the archive project, was a project of the advisory board. And the advisory board is there to do just that, to advise the current board, usually in the person of the president, because the president of the board is on the advisory board, and to support the activities of the organization, and to be there if somebody needs something, wants to brainstorm, wants to, lend their name to an event, help to try to get somebody to come to an event, and to be there. And what's great is the advisory board just loves each other. So it's like a reunion. The board only meets a couple times a year, but it's like a reunion each time. And you have many boards combined. And obviously it's not everybody, but it's whoever chooses to come at a given time. And great projects have come out of it. So it's exciting.
And where do you go from here, Linda?
Well, just keep going. You just keep going to NIWIFT events. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
You might have a moment and take to do some
Yes,
of
we
the
do. We have 2
Clifford?
or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so when we're building a franchise, when we're building a brand, we start in lots of different ways.
I'm sorry. Okay, now we're rolling again.
Okay. When we build a franchise for a new property, we might start in 2 very obvious places. One is a book. So if you look at Clifford, the Big Red Dog is over 45 years old and has been a beloved book in this country and in other countries for quite a while. So the real challenge was, how do you make this into a TV show that kids are going to love, but also how do you take the inspiration and the ideas in that are so successful in that book and really make them translate to the screen. So in this case, Clifford started with a book. In the case of Word Girl, it started as an original idea. And books will follow, books are going to come in the market. So it's always kind of interesting to see what are you going to start with and in what ways. And Scholastic has such rich properties, just fantastic properties. Now every year I go to TV markets in Kahn. So I'm Kahn in Kahn. And Word Girl, here's Word Girl flying over Kahn. She's been there. She's been there. She looks exactly like this. This is the hotel I stay in, and there's Word Girl right over the hotel. But at these markets, MIP and MIPCOM, and they really just basically, in French, it's the translation of International Program Markets. And we have an opportunity to present to buyers from the biggest countries and the smallest countries our new shows. And if you look at this Word Girl flyer, you'll see that what we bring and what we send out in advance is a screener, and the screener's got a few different episodes. And of course, we're giving you a hint of who the main characters are in so doing. So it's kind of fun. And Clifford, I'll show you. He's very big and very red, and we wanted to get that point across. So there he is. He's larger than life, and he's still growing. So thank you.
All right, actually, let's just do a little, we can turn the pages, just get a couple extra
This is
different
really old.
choices.
This is really, really old. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Okay, so here's Clifford. Oh, and the best part is Clifford. Here's the best part is his tail wags.
And it says see it on PBS Kids. What kind of arrangement or relationship do you need with PBS in your international markets?
Well, actually, none. PBS is the U.S. broadcaster. So when we will brand something, this is actually a marketing piece that was done by our U.S. group. What's great is I might give this to an international buyer because they'll certainly know PBS and they respect PBS, and so I think it's you know it's a great endorsement. What we'll do around the world on consumer products, for example, on the DVD boxes, we'll say as seen on and list the broadcaster in that particular country, because remember, oftentimes I'm going country by country when I'm doing deals. And then sometimes they're worldwide deals. So we might work with one very large multinational company to do a video deal that's global, or a toy deal that's global. And then the challenge is going to be, it's great that it's global, and how are you also going to really work with everybody locally? And what I must do is pull all the local partners together, country by country. And so we identify key markets and we'll do that. We're having a huge hit right now with Clifford in Spain. And Clifford's been doing great in Japan.
Really?
Yeah, in Japan, my proudest moment was the Tokyo metros had the Happy Manor campaign. And the Happy Manor campaign was a poster, different poster every month, like don't play your music loud on the subway, don't have your wet umbrella, don't shake it out on people's feet. So these very funny posters all over the Tokyo metro, and I was there the day they put them up.
Oh, wow.
So that was fun.
Clifford does miss manner.
Yeah, really. But he's
Emily
friendly. He's friendly. He would never chastise you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So
Great.
that's it.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you.